Welcome, welcome, ZER Nation. It's been a while. I've been missing you guys. First time this year to host one of our Scale Masterclasses. And welcome, everyone. I hope that you're already entering and joining us today. Love for you to drop in the chat. What does your business do? How long have you been operating? And how many warriors are on your team today? Today promises to be a good one. And again, as we always like to do, let's make it interactive. We have questions prepared, but we are very happy to get your questions as well. So please drop your questions in the chat. We'll take them as we go through the session. So if we can just bring up the presentation. Again, welcome to everyone. As you're coming in, just tell us, what does your business do? How long have you been operating? And how many people do you have in your team? Just so that we get a sense of who's with us and what might be in focus for you. So welcome, 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 everyone. As I mentioned, we'll do a brief, if you can move to the next slide, we'll do a brief introduction into our SCALE framework. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with our SCALE framework, but we just like to do a recap, particularly for those who are less familiar, before we go into our live Q&A. And again, this is an interactive session. Drop your questions. We'll take those questions as we go. I'm always very happy if all the questions are coming from the audience and we don't even have to fall back on the prepared questions that we already have. So let's just jump right into it. Why do we even do this masterclass? We run this on a monthly basis because this is our way to really educate the ecosystem, educate both our clients and the wider market, ZER Nation, and to empower African businesses and leaders across the continent and beyond. And so we like to use this opportunity to share knowledge, to share our tools, different frameworks, and really find time, 60 minutes, just 60 minutes, 1 hour every month to really upskill ourselves in each of the 5 pillars that we find as really the bedrock of building sustainable businesses, resilient and scalable businesses. So why me? I'm the founder of ZER Consultant Africa. Adeolu is my name. I've been the CEO since 2020, so I'm sitting in the seats, the same shoes that many of you are wearing. And I've also been on the flip side. I myself have been a strategic investor for one of the largest global multinationals for over 3 years, acquiring businesses and buying businesses across the continent. And this is just one of 4 continents that I've worked on, 25 plus years. This is my 26th year this month, actually. And so starting in the US, going to Europe, Asia, and now finally back home in Africa for the last almost 10 years. Worked for multinationals, 2 different multinationals for the first 20 years of my career. And then in 2023, I created the SCALE framework. And at the end of the day, I consider myself an Afro-optimist, and I hope you do too. What is the SCALE framework? So basically, the SCALE framework is a bedrock of the advisory that we give to our clients, looking at 5 different areas with spelling out SCALE. We see this as a 5-step roadmap to business transformation. We're all trying to change. We're all trying to get better and to progress. And so these are the 5 areas that we look at. We start with strategy. And strategy is about really setting the directions, finding your North Star and figuring out where you're headed. And this applies whether you're looking at yourself from a career perspective or whether we're looking at yourself as a business. Then we look around people. And so here we're talking about championing excellence and excellence. So it's one thing to set a strategy, but you need actually people to execute that strategy. So and it's about the excellence of those people. So the better the people that you're working with to execute a strategy, the easier it is to actually execute. But at the end of the day, leadership starts at the top. So for you as a CEO, for you as a founder, for you as a business leader, what are you doing to set that standard of excellence and to accelerate leadership throughout your organization, leading us to governance? And we talk about leveraging governance for sustainable growth. And we see that as really the basis for everything. So you can have a pretty strategy, you can have excellent people to execute. doing a lot of capacity building to build up your strategy. But if you don't have the right governance procedures and processes in place, then it will all really be for naught. And today, what we're focusing on is the E pillar, the fifth pillar of the SCALE framework, which is about expanding your impact via growth capital. And with that, I want to introduce our guest for today, James Bowen Jones, who is a Welshman who's based in Switzerland, was actually born in Dubai, and travels across the continent. The first time we actually met was here in Lagos just a few weeks ago. So I'm really happy to be able to continue the discussion. James has decades in private wealth, in banking, but he's actually an engineer. And for me, that actually is something that really resonates with me because I'm a mathematician. So both coming from very technical backgrounds, mathematical backgrounds, but then looking really to make an impact in the business world in Africa. So James, please, you're welcome.
Good afternoon.
Hi,
Thank you very
James.
much
Nice
for
to see
having
you
me
again.
on your show today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So, because I know that you've been really busy running around. You were just in Lagos and Abuja a couple of weeks ago, and then you stopped in some other places. You were in the mountains you mentioned over the weekend, and now you've taken some time with us. So we really appreciate it. And
Absolutely.
go ahead, please.
No, absolutely. Delighted to be here. Yeah, got back from a fairly heavy sort of travel schedule for business and just to unwind. Spent a couple of days up in the Swiss Alps hiking, which is one of my passions. As a Welshman, that's what attracted me to Switzerland in the first place. The mountains, they're a bit bigger than what we have back home, huh?
But you don't have the Welsh accent, so I'm glad I'm able to understand you today. So let's
Thank
jump
you.
right into it, James. When people think about capital, when people think about money, we think that it's on the one side we say money is the root of all evil, but on the flip side we think that money will solve all our problems, right? So when many founders approach capital injection, we see it as a cure-all for everything. Once I get the right amount of money in, all my problems would dissolve. But in your view, what are the most common fatal mistakes founders make before they even approach an institution like yours and other global investors?
Well, I guess I'm very lucky, right? So I typically people approach us when they've already been successful, right? So
Right.
I don't know what all the mistakes are, but I can definitely share some of the qualities I've seen in the successful entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial families who've
Mm,
been able to create long-term businesses and value on the continent. I think going back to being an engineer, I think, the way I look at things is, problems and things which don't work are opportunities. These are things, if you can fix them, you can create value. So
mhm.
that's sort of how I approach business and the way I sort of approach, interaction with the families I look after and the new families we, get the opportunity to help. But the thing is in life, once you think you've solved one problem, it converts into another problem. And having money is a problem in itself. It's a nice problem to have, maybe,
Let's
but it's
have
a
that.
problem nonetheless.
I can imagine. And so not all money creates value. I mean, as you mentioned, right? So
Absolutely. So,
having money.
maybe just to just to finish, the three qualities I do see
Mhm.
in successful people who create businesses has been being passionate, hard work. I mean, businesses are not built overnight. They take
Yeah.
years, if not decades. If not generations, and then resilience. I mean, resilience, I think, is an undervalued quality, and being able to put up with what life throws at you is it's super important.
I'd like to dig into that a bit more because resilience is a word that is starting to become more and more It's almost becoming a buzzword, but in a good way, because I think you're right that it's really resilience both in children and adults that will show us how successful a child will be as they grow older. So, in what ways have you seen the successful? You said people come to you when they're successful. So, what ways have they shown their resilience?
So, often some of the most successful people, and if you look at, what's happening in Lagos at the moment, if you look at, Mr. Dangote, what he's achieved, or Dr. Dangote, I mean, he's somebody who's just built over time, great businesses and been very, very determined, and it's just taken time, right? But
Hmm.
at the moment, somewhere like Nigeria is really benefiting from the oil price. It's been a
Yeah.
problem in the Middle East, but it's created an opportunity for the Dangote Group, and this listing, which is going to happen in September, is super exciting, right?
Yeah. So I have a question here. What does your business do? So I think people are also trying to understand what CIS, am I saying it right? CIS Private Bank
All right,
does.
that's correct. So maybe just quickly, the elevator pitch. I mean, we're a family-owned Swiss private bank. The family behind, who are actively involved in the business, the founder is the chairman. The CEO of the bank is the son, or one of the sons, within the business. What we do is we look after entrepreneurial families in the markets which we cover. Africa is one of our core geographies, particularly Anglophone Africa, and I have the privilege of looking after that sort of segment for the family. And typically, the families we look after, we look after their rainy day money, because the reality is it does rain, and we look after their, and our core expertise is asset management, helping them sort of deploy that capital into globally diversified portfolios. But at the same time, everything which goes around that, things like wealth planning, making sure that you've got it set up for the future, whether you want to set up a family trust or a family foundation, corporate vehicles, and injecting capital into your business, borrowed against your family capital, which we do.
Okay, okay. So I think that makes it clear for our listeners, for our viewers. So that actually then brings us into our next question. When we talk about African businesses who aspire to expand internationally, which for all the sustainable businesses, that at the end of the day is an aspiration. But we know that financials only tell half the story. So your private bank, based in Switzerland, all these assumptions about what a Swiss private banking looks like. But how much weight do international investors place on governance? Financials, resilience of the founder, other things that you're looking at. But how much weight do you, as an international investor, do you place on actually the governance structure and the ESG framework of the companies you invest in?
So, I mean, I think if you look at ESG as an acronym, G is the most important. If you don't have G, then you don't have
Hmm.
E and you don't have S, right? So the
Hmm.
governance allows the environment to be looked after around you, and the business to be a long-term sustainable going concern. But for me, governance, there's two sides to governance. One is you've got governance within a family, because
Hmm.
typically, it's a family or a entrepreneur who's the principal shareholder of a business, who's the person who is the energy behind, bringing this business off the ground, or sustaining its growth and taking it to the next level of growth. The governance within a family, and then you've got the governance within the corporation, so within the firm which you're now leading. I think that both sides of those need to be addressed. Governance, I think, creates more value in an asset, because it's more credible, it's easier to understand, and typically that's where you might get better exit multiples.
Hmm.
But that there's a cost of making sure that's put in place. Often, entrepreneurs, they're ideas people, and governance isn't necessarily something which comes naturally to them. But that's where having employed the right people, having the right people to help structure your enterprise is so important.
Do you see a difference then when it's a family business as opposed to maybe a more, I don't want to say commercial setup, but let's say it's a founder driven business?
You look at sometimes families, they want to come, the next generation want to come into the business.
Hmm.
Sometimes they don't, right? And
Hmm.
if they don't want to come into the business, then you need to prepare for either disposing of that business and an exit, or you need to set it up with long term management to be able to continue that business for the future.
Hmm.
And that means often opening up the capital structure as well. But it really, if it, family businesses, if it's several generations, then the reality is those businesses have to grow to sustain the mouths which need to be
Hmm.
fed coming into that business, right? So
Right.
growth is so important, to the success of a business.
Yeah. Yeah. So that then brings us to the types of capital, right? Because all money is not the same. We discussed this just before, and not all money is a fit for every different kind of company. So there's patient capital that we want to discuss. There's smart capital. There's other types of capital. Maybe just help the audience understand the different types of capital and what they should be looking at.
So, once you get to the point that you're ready to sort of open up your, capital structure to outside investment, then I think you need to think carefully about, what's the purpose of bringing that capital into your business.
Hmm.
You've got, many different sources, but, they come with benefits and constraints, right? There's no free lunch, as they say. If you need to think about whether it's, equity or debt. Probably one of the first questions. And then
Hmm.
if you're gonna, raise debt, then you need to understand that, that will come with some governance, and then and will come with some covenants, which you then have to satisfy. And you also, there's going to be a service element of interest, and you need to have enough free cash flow to be able to service that interest. Otherwise, you're going to be cleaned out. Now, if you're then looking at types of investors, you've got developmental banks which can give debt or equity, but
Hmm.
again that comes with a lot of constraints. Then there's things like private equity. Now, the challenge, I think, with private equity is they're not wanting to hold on necessarily long term. Now, that could be a good example where you bring private equity in because you actually ultimately want to exit, and then that's part of the journey of you exiting. But I think the first thing is to decide on where you want to go before you start sort of start the journey.
So if I'm here trying to decide whether I want to go the debt route or the equity route, what are the first one or two things I should consider when you say that I need to understand where I want to go? What
Well, I
determines
mean,
which
is
direction I
is
go?
the business cash flow positive, right? I mean, is it
Hmm.
generating enough free cash flow to be able to sustain it? Because you do not want to be taking debt when you don't have free cash flow.
Right, right.
Because otherwise it's that's going to wipe you out.
Hmm.
Then you probably only have equity as a route at your disposal. if you're, equity, maybe you're looking for a partnership to expand into new markets, and with that, Africa has 54 countries, right? So if you're going to expand to your next into your neighbour's backyard, then maybe you actually want to partner with a family who's already knows their way around in that
Mhm.
country, right? Because they're having that local knowledge makes a huge difference.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And I won't put you on a spot to ask you about the discussion that's going on between about VC and whether VC money is the right kind of money to be bringing into to this part of the world. But as a private bank, so it's still digging more into this question around: okay, do I go debt or do I go equity? When do I go to a private bank like yours?
So look, typically we come into play when you've already created a pool of liquidity, or you have
Hmm.
the ability to create a pool of liquidity to put into a safe place, which you can then
Hmm.
use to deploy elsewhere within your ventures. I'm a big believer in this sort of 10% sort of rule. So, a lot of our families we look after approximately across the board 10% of their net wealth.
Okay.
And so, they've created this pool of liquidity, rainy day money, in the event that there is a problem and they need to bring it into the business,
Hmm.
or to help them to expand elsewhere in the world, and often it's elsewhere within the continent.
Okay. Okay. That's making sense. And so for all our guests, again, if you're just joining us, please feel free to drop your questions. We'll take the questions as we go. In the meantime, we'll continue on with our discussion. So let's talk about James around uh, capital readiness, investment ready, investor ready. We hear it said different ways. I prefer investment ready as opposed to investor ready, because for me the whole point is to get ready to bring in capital, not to be focused on a particular investor. Then perhaps that's not the right incentives that we have in place. So when so many founders are looking at growth capital. So we're looking at growth capital, and I'm looking at the very beginning startups, but growth capital. And so they conflate it directly with a successful funding round and a flashy pitch deck. But that, at the end of the day, a pitch deck, maybe it gets you the money, but it doesn't help you to figure out how to invest the money, how to execute, and how to build your business with that money. So how can business leaders like ourselves really redefine our internal operations to make sure that we're actually genuinely capital ready for when those big funds come in?
So I guess I think when you start to move in that direction, you need to be ready for a mindset shift. Because you're now moving from being the entrepreneur to an investor of sorts, right? You're receiving investment capital to be
Mm-hmm.
deployed. And so you
Hmm.
need to think, you know, put yourself in their shoes. And
Hmm.
that's a challenging transition to do. As an entrepreneur, you're
Hmm.
passionate, hardworking, resilient, but you're very focused on your baby, right?
Right.
When you're receiving somebody else's capital, you now need to be the custodian of that. And you now
Hmm.
need to think about the risks. You need to think about the what ifs. And again, that sort of resilience is super important. So I think that mindset shift, I think, is super important. And I think, going back to working out who you want to sort of engage for, bringing, potentially investing in your business. But more often than not, the going back to your sort of scale,
Framework.
framework, you know, those, if you get those four things right, so strategy, executing with excellence, leadership, governance, both at a family level and at a corporate level, then typically the capital, you know, it finds you fairly easily, because, you know, you know, the people in the know in these markets are usually, you know, there are clear, like, winners, you know, and the market talks once you're on the ground.
Yeah, the market talks. You made some, really key points in that. So the one around mindset, and that's something that we need to think about, not only in the investment world, but in anything that we're trying to succeed in. Making sure that we are ready ourselves, not just the company, but ourselves as founders to receive those funds. I think that's a very interesting point. And then another point you made that I would like to dig into a bit more is not we talked a lot about not all money is the right money, not all money is good money, not all investors are the right investors, and how do we as CEOs, as founders, make sure that the philosophy is aligned with the investors that we're chasing after, rather than just chasing after any investor, after any funds that are out there. So maybe you can answer that, and then we'll go to Pascal's question.
Okay, so would you mind just restating the question, just so I to buy me some time?
Yes, no problem. So it sort of ties in between mindset. So my mindset as a founder, but also the mindset of the investors that I'm going after. So in that case, mindset is more interpreted as their investment philosophies. So how do I ensure that my mindset and my vision and my strategy for my company aligns with the investment philosophy of the investors I'm targeting, rather than just doing a scattergun approach where I'm just trying to get any money in that I can get.
Absolutely. Okay. So, so I have this sort of expression that sometimes it makes sense to get engaged before getting married, right? So, you know, I think not being in a rush is super important with these things. You know, I think you need to get to know the outfit which is wanting to, you know, put capital into your business, understand their purpose, understand their time horizon, understanding what their values are. Understanding
Mhm.
people's values and purpose gives you the time, or gives you, you know, an insight into when things get tough, whether it's going to work out or not. Because
Yeah.
you know, marriage is built on, you know, lack of alignment on values and lack of alignment on purpose do break down. So, you know, I use the analogy of a you know, a marriage as kind of a, you know, that's when it makes sense. You've got engaged, you can see that it's going to work, and then you then come to sort of, you know, tie the knot. So I don't think these things should not be done in a rush.
Yeah, I like that. So just like you shouldn't you shouldn't rush to get married. You also shouldn't rush to get an investor into your company. So there's a question from okay. There's a comment from Patricia. Which one do we want to do? The comment. Okay. So I like the comment about the need for founders to start thinking like investors once external funding comes in. Most founders struggle with this. Yes. And so we discussed that a bit. And there was also a question that came up from Pascal. Thank you, Pascal, for your question. James, I would love to understand how interested African families actually are in investing into African startups. I think that's a loaded one.
So look, I think it's often the case. You know, it's you know, serial entrepreneurs, right? So, you know, the founders of businesses often, you know, once they've sold their business, go on to set up something new because that's what they like doing. Often,
Mm,
you know, I also say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. You know,
right.
if you've grown up in a household or where your parents are entrepreneurs, often you know, your children do the same, but they're also looking to set their mark. And the world is changing very quickly at the moment. I think we are in in somewhat in a industrial revolution of sorts, driven by artificial intelligence, and this
Mhm.
is something which most business leaders are talking about at the moment, how they can have a strategy on deploying this very, very powerful technology in their businesses.
Mhm. Yeah, I like that. There are different types of families and a different type of investors. So perhaps targeting investors who were entrepreneurs themselves or come from entrepreneurial families is already a good place to start. We have another question from Tano. We see entrepreneurs seeking funding in the wrong places. How do we better match entrepreneurs with the capital suited to their level of operations? What levels do you engage with as CIS Private Bank?
I see entrepreneurs seeking funding in the wrong places. So look, I guess it's as per your framework, making a wrong hire, takes you down a very expensive journey. It's like getting married to the wrong person. It's very expensive to get divorced and to exit that sort of situation. So, it's worth taking the time and using your network. And there are plenty of networks in Africa which are very, very
Hmm.
powerful. I mean, one of the networks, we have rubbed shoulders with a lot is the Young Presidents Organization. This is an organization where, people can, spar with peers in other industries to, in a safe place to be able to sort of kick ideas around and source maybe capital or at least when they've sourced get sense check it before they sign on the dotted line.
And I'm glad that you used the N word, networking, right? Because networking is not just for career professionals, it's also for business owners. And really building those relationships and those networks before you need them. I always tell people the best time to build a network is before you need it. And that's just as critical when you're building a business as it is if you're working in corporate as a 9 to 5 professional. So I'm glad that you brought that in. So let's please keep dropping the questions. Very insightful, and thank you, James, for your responses. Okay, no, the same question. So we'll move on to our next one. And I asked the audience to listen closely. We'll be asking you a follow up as the audience to this question. So, James, you spent decades. As decades makes it sound like you're really old, but let's call it decades.
I don't have too much hair, right?
So
Wisdom hair, they say, yeah, or lack.
exactly, exactly. And you're working closely, as you mentioned, and you mentioned you dropped some names: highly successful global entrepreneurs, wealthy families looking for alpha. And this relates to one of the earlier questions that the audience dropped. So when these investors are evaluating the sub-Saharan landscape, what determines and separates the select African businesses that they actually decide to invest in versus the ones that struggle and continue to struggle to get this kind of capital?
Um, so I think the ones who the ones who find the capital, typically, they're capital ready. They're successful businesses, um, which people are falling over themselves to invest in. Right? It's not it's not. I think often the capital finds you before you need it. Right?
Hmm.
I think it's actually sometimes you need to say no to the capital. Huh?
Be willing to say no.
Yeah.
I'm sure some people are falling off their chairs with that response, but yes, I think you're very right. Be willing to say no. Not all capital is the right capital for you, and be very careful who you get into bed with or who you get married to use the analogy you used earlier. So that brings us to our first poll. So asking the audience, both on LinkedIn and YouTube, when an international investor, let's say private bank, looks at your enterprise, your business today, what is the biggest structural asset you see? So this is a self-assessment, be honest, transparent. You see that you need based on this discussion to strengthen, to attract that capital. So we have three options. So option A is around your strategic alignment, and we'll bring up the options on the screen so that you can get a written reminder. Option B is around your team, and James had mentioned around the expense of making a bad hire, and option C is around governance. So strategy, team, governance. So those are our pillar S, C, and L. So again, when an international investor would look at your business, what is the biggest structural asset you find that you need to strengthen to attract that capital? So just drop your responses in the chat box. We'll see them popping up, and we'll continue on with the discussion even as we are seeing those responses pop up. So again, it's strategy, it's a team and talent, and it's governance. Good. So let's go on to the next question. And here we're talking about Africa, and the perception of Africa continues to change, continues to evolve. Sort of, there's a pendulum back and forth, but I think we're on an upward trajectory at the moment. So, representing your company from Geneva, you have a unique vantage point because you're speaking from outside Africa, which is always great to get that perspective. When you're in the continent, sometimes maybe you're drinking the Kool-Aid too much, but from the outside, you're able to, and outside but familiar, you're able to give us some additional perspective. So, how have you seen the perception of Africa corporate excellence shift over the last decade? And which investment opportunities, and maybe AI is going to come into this conversation now, do you see emerging over the next 5 to 10 years?
Okay. So look, I think the first thing is, what is the perception? So, when I tell my network that, that my focus within wealth management is Africa, they're like, ooh, that's a complicated place, complicated place to travel to, complicated
Yeah.
place from a compliance perspective.
Mhm.
The politics are complicated. People are fearful, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
To see, seize the prickly pear. Um, you know, but a lot of these people, it comes from, having not spent time on the
Yeah.
continent.
Yeah.
I think, when they come to Africa, they're often surprised at the level of advancement. Things like, M-Pesa is, this is a technology which originated in Kenya,
Mhm.
in East
Mhm.
Africa, and mobile banking, was solving a problem. It happens to now be the biggest deposit-taking bank in Kenya, and
Mhm.
and everybody is competing to have a similar platform in their own respective country. So I think again, the level of wealth in these countries is starting to become astronomical. Now, some of it is fast money, and
Yeah.
and I think this is the challenge, right? So,
Mhm.
if you start to have businesses where you are interacting with government for contracts, for permits, this is when it becomes very challenging, right? So, because regimes or political systems change, and so it may be quick to build a business whilst you're in, while you're have good relations with the administration. But then when the tide goes out, it becomes very, very challenging. I mean, you only got to
Yeah.
look at what's happened in Angola with
Mhm.
the Santos family, right? So,
Right.
I think building businesses is often the sort of bread and butter businesses, fixing simple problems which are very, very successful, because there are a lot of problems still to be fixed, right? Whether it's manufacturing and making food products, or whether it's making clothes or shoes, or on the manufacturing side, or whether it's providing financial services on the insurance side. And I know that's a space you know very well, Yul, but or on the banking side, look at mobile banking. So these are the things which I think are which are very exciting. I mean, another theme which I've seen being looked at by entrepreneurs is protein, right? Fish farming. This is
Okay.
something which is massive, I think, on
Hmm.
the continent, right?
Yep.
And fish is a very good source of protein, but has lots of other benefits too.
Hmm.
But also challenges to deliver it in a safe fashion to the markets. Now, so despite all of that, I think the other big theme, which is probably more less we'll say defensive, is energy, whether it's oil and gas or whether it's solar, which is a massive thing. Is something which I think the continent is extremely wealthy with. Huge deposits, and there's lots of activity going on in those areas. The other area is mining, and of course, with this and maybe just sort of dial back, but we are going through this industrial revolution with artificial intelligence, and what we've got is the US. They're very strong on the energy side when it comes to oil and gas.
Hmm.
And you've got China, who are very strong on the minerals and rare earth metals. These and Africa is a very important continent as far as these two elements. And to allow this AI boom to happen, we're going to continue to need those rare earth metals and those industrial metals to put in copper lines and electrify the world, and silver to put into solar panels, and a lot of this comes from the continent. But what the challenge with these is often these do touch governments in some respects. So that's where the governance is super important.
Wow, that's such a rich answer. There's so many things I want to unpack. So maybe I just start one at a time. First, I wanted to start with the M-Pesa example that you gave, which I love that you bring that in, because I still remember when I was I was in Germany at the time when the story of M-Pesa was becoming more and more known, and so I was having this conversation with one of my German colleagues, and trying to explain to him why I was so excited about M-Pesa, etc. And then he looked at me and he said, "Yeah, but we have banks." Like, he was just very dismissive. Like, why do we need mobile money when we have banks? Everyone has a bank account. Of course, not understanding that, first of all, not everybody has a bank account. Most of the world does not have a bank account. But fast forward to today, when Apple Pay, has taken the world, the Western world by storm, right? Which is mobile money, and basically a successor of M-Pesa. So M-Pesa did it first out of Africa,
Yep.
where certain countries were poo-pooing it, and then Apple came with Apple Pay, and now everybody's using it, right? So so that's one of the stories that just always sparks a memory and a smile when I hear about M-Pesa. But then you talked about minerals and energy, which is becoming a touchier and touchier discussion on the continent, right? Because in the past, certain powers were able to simply extract what they wanted, with local government support, and not much value from that extraction staying with the local communities. And that's starting to shift, right? We have certain countries that are African countries who are saying, no, you have to do you have to keep the value within the country, and there has to be ownership within the country of those companies. So just your thoughts on that. And I'm not trying to turn this into a political discussion, but just from a more an investment perspective, what do you think of that trend?
So, um, I think as soon as you start to export something not finished, you miss an opportunity, right? So,
Hmm. Hmm.
the more value add you can create to an export before it's exported, the more typically the more value you trap, right? And again, but you need to be prepared to make the investments, and this is can be long term, right?
Hmm.
So, so one of the I went up to the Swiss Alps to hike this weekend, and I went up to one of the big dams up there, which is a hydro station, which powers a lot of the region, of Switzerland around it. And this is enormous. It's and in Africa you have these types of infrastructure, but you need the vision to build these, and then
Yeah.
typically it comes out of times of crisis. I mean, this dam was built after the Second World War when the Swiss realized they couldn't rely on their next door neighbors because they keep going into fights, right? Switzerland is
Yeah.
independent. It's an island in the middle of Europe, but it's not.
Hmm.
It's not Europe. It's its own sovereign nation,
Right.
and that's often how these things materialize, right? Is after a crisis.
Yeah. Yeah. And but it's and but like you said, when you're in the crisis, sometimes it's difficult to have that sort of long term thinking, like the Swiss had during the World War II, uh, because your focus and your financial focus as a government, as a society, community might be elsewhere. There were some questions that came up while we're having this discussion. Let's take some of those questions. I think I saw a question from Patricia, if we can bring that up while I try to get back into. Okay, so now we're back with people. Yes, the startup ecosystem is full of talented individuals with great ideas. So we don't have a dearth of great ideas, but we're looking for money for those ideas, and then execution. And for me, execution is the biggest piece. Anyone can draw up a strategy. Anyone can have ideas. Ideas are free. The dime a dozen, but it's the execution that we all struggle with. So, what guidance can you offer to these businesses?
Look, I mean, an idea is only as valuable as it is on paper, right?
Hmm.
You know, actually taking an idea into execution is where the real work happens, right? I mean, designing buildings and is inexpensive, but the work is actually building the building, right? And that's when the headaches come and the problems need to be fixed. I don't think there's an easy fix to this. I'm afraid it's just slow, hard graft, huh? Hard work.
Resilience,
Yeah.
right? Like you said, yeah, hard work, resilience. And we don't want all the architects in the audience to be screaming, but yes, yeah, I understand what you're saying around the actual building the business takes a bit more sweat than drawing the plans. Uh, okay, so please, folks, keep dropping your questions. We're having a very lively discussion already nearing the end of the hour. The hour has gone by very quickly, and so we'll skip a few of these. Maybe go to the advice that you can give us as African CEOs. Many of us are CEOs based here on the continent, including myself. So if we were the two of us were sitting, so we ignore everybody else, and so we just continue the discussion, and you're giving me a private advisory session as an ambitious CEO, which I am, and say that I want to get capital in the next 3 years into ZER Consulting Africa. So what's the single most critical advice you would give me from an investment standpoint?
Okay. So look, I think focusing on the money is not the answer or the capital. Focus on the product, the service, the
Mm.
execution of the immaculate, the business plan,
Mhm.
the the day to day. The money is somewhat a byproduct of your success, right? So whatever you're
Mm,
trying to achieve, whatever problem you're trying to fix. I mean, look at Apple. The iPhone. I mean, that fixed. That put a very powerful computer in
mm,
a lot of people's hands, right? And that was because Steve Jobs wanted to fix a problem, and he
mm.
did it with executed with excellence. And it's why it's been such a revolutionary product, which continues to go from strength to strength.
So focus on the problem. That's when I take away.
Yeah.
I'll take.
So
So focus on
and
the problem.
the capital will come.
Yeah, build it and they will come. So there's a movie that I grew up with in the U.S. that they had a famous line: "Build it and they will come." So build your business, and the investors will come knocking. Good. So to close, and please, it doesn't mean that you can't drop more questions. We're happy to take one or two more. But to close, so here at ZER, we continue to reinforce that organizations do not simply need more cash. That's something that you've also emphasized throughout the discussion, but that we need the right strategy, the right governance, the right leadership to actually scale and to scale with purpose. So, in one powerful sentence, I'm a big believer in the one thing. So, in one powerful sentence, what does expanding impact through growth capital mean to you?
Okay, so I've been a bit naughty here, right? So put your question into AI to see what answer came back, right? So I'm going
I
to
like
read it
it.
out to you.
Okay.
I'm going to put it into a couple of different engines because there's a lot out there. I'm going to put it into Claude, I put it into ChatGPT, and I put it into Gemini. And
Okay.
I'm going to read you back what it came back with, and I'll then actually build on what I think. Yeah?
Okay.
So, intentionally using strategic funding is to amplify your core mission, strengthen organizational governance, and empower leadership to drive sustainable large-scale change. So, I think it's quite accurate, right? It amplifies what you're trying to achieve, right? But if you're not achieving it at a small scale, then
Mm,
you're not going to achieve, you're only going to amplify your problems. So that I think is the amplify piece is super important. Huh?
yeah.
Leverage or capital, it expand or it amplifies an opportunity.
I like that. So money will amplify what is already there. So if whatever there is bad, it will amplify that. If whatever is there is good, it will amplify that as well into excellence. Love it. So we've shared a number of actionable insights here today with you on what it takes to be truly capital ready and preserve generational wealth across our continent. So we always want to lead everyone to take something away from these discussions. So what's one tangible action you, our audience, are committed to take this week? Whether it's our scale scorecard to audit your operational assets, whether it's formalizing an advisory board to increase your governance, whether it's open a succession conversation with your leadership team, particularly if you're a family business. Please share your commitment in the chat. We'll read all of them and respond. And with that, James, I just want to thank you for joining us today. It's really been a pleasure from Lagos to Geneva and to have this discussion.
Adiul, thank you very much for having me, and wish you a great day.
Thank you. Thank you. And so just as we close, if we can bring it back up the presentation, as we discussed, we have our scale framework, and of course, there are 5 pillars of this framework: strategy, champion, accelerate, leverage, and expand. Today, we focus on expanding your impact, but these are not linear pillars. It's a roadmap for a reason. They all interconnect. So even as you're building new strategies, you need to review your strategy regularly. Of course, you're bringing in people to execute on a strategy. It's not a one-time thing. Leadership continuous development. I'm a big fan of continuous development at every level of leadership. And of course, governance is a journey, not a destination. So, and looking at all of those five different areas, them being interconnected. Here, as we had asked for what is your takeaway? What is your next step? Don't let this just be a session that you listen to and you go away. So I hope everyone is dropping their focus areas for the next week in the chat box. If one of them is the scale scorecard, you can scan the scorecard on the screen. We'll also drop the link in the chat box as well. And really, as we think about what James brought into today's conversation, it's really around being able to say no to the wrong things. So strategy is not the only thing. Strategy is also about what you say no to, but capital and money is also something to say no to. So make sure that you're building for the future, not building for an investor. And again, build it and they will come. So share your action commitments in the chat right now. Scan the QR code to be able to take our scale scorecard. And we thank you for tuning in to this monthly session of our scale masterclass. And remember, the only truth is the result, and even the most self-sufficient nation dances to a global tune. So we'll see you next time on the 12th of August. Please already put a hold in your calendar and you'll receive the information soon. Thank you for joining us today.